Hi everyone. We'll get started in just 2 minutes as everyone sifts into the waiting room. I'm just going to give us all 2 minutes before we begin. Excellent. I think it's been 10 minutes and everyone's had the opportunity to join in. Mustafa, do you think we're good to go?
Yes, Ved, you're good to go.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and get started. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to all of you today for our first session of ROP training, where our first in a series of sessions that are going to be training you on the many aspects of conference for H1 Dubai. My name is Ved, and I'm the USG of Operations and the chair of ECOFIN at H1 Dubai. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity to go over some of these rules of procedure with you ahead of the conference so we can all be on the same page when we get to Dubai. I'm joined by my Director General Patil. Patil, would you like to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am the Director General for HMUN Dubai 2025, and I'm really excited to be joining Vade to go over some key rules of procedure and to answer any questions that you may have before the conference.
Excellent. And so with that, we get started with H1 Dubai's rules of procedure. So in this presentation, we're going to walk you through some really important big ideas ahead of the conference. First, Model UN basics. Then we're going to look at the verbiage of parliamentary procedure. We will then overview resolutions versus crisis committees and how those might look a little different. We'll have notable differences from the existing Dubai circuit of Model UN and HMUN's different changes that we use in the collegiate circuit in America. And then we will talk a little bit about sensity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So first, let's start with Model UN basics. In a Model UN committee, we have delegate aims, which are twofold. In a resolution committee, we have the aim of the committee is to work towards creating a paper, so in the form of a draft resolution that addresses the committee topics or agenda. These ensure that the country's policies are very clearly reflected in this resolution, and delegates work together in big blocks, which are groups of multiple delegates representing many countries who may have interests that align a certain way or policy suggestions that would naturally complement one another, who work together to put together a comprehensive policy solution for their countries. In these resolution based committees, the goal is to be a clear but diplomatic bloc leader to sponsor a strong draft resolution. This is a large conglomerate of all of the committee's ideas that you're trying, or all of your bloc's ideas for committee that you're trying to reflect, and have the most comprehensive, central, or well informed clauses on that draft resolution. That means having really contributed the most meaningful and substantive policy, and being on authors panel, which is an opportunity to then speak to that paper's merits in front of the committee in a more debates format, for both its working paper and draft resolution. Now, for a crisis committee, the main overview of your objectives going in excuse me, should be to respond to crisis scenarios via committee directives. So that is going to be to ensure that you're able to tackle various issues that we as a crisis team present to you. Next, to pursue your public character interests in committee taken to address the crisis. So, as an individual, as opposed to being a country, you want to pursue your individual interests as opposed to any country policies or interests at the solo level publicly in addressing and tackling the new crisis issues presented to you. And then you also want to simultaneously, using the backroom elements of committee, pursue your private character interests so that, again, on two fronts, you're able to both respond to the important elements of committee as a whole versus the things that are relevant to address privately. And the goals or the markers of success in a crisis committee are going to be being one of the most influential individuals on committee action, sponsoring the strongest directives, writing the most central or comprehensive, high quality. Here, when we say clauses, we mean clauses on a different kind of paperwork, so for different texture called directives, having the most interesting and influential crisis arc that really drives what committee is talking about through the course of conference. So these are the big objectives or the big ideas that differ slightly from these types of committees. And now we're going to talk a little more about what the staffing of these look like, so you're a little more familiar with our roles and responsibilities when we get to conference. So committee staff in the dais. First, we have the director, who is a substantive expert who has written the background guide, who knows the content about the topic and the countries involved and the other nations or like portfolios, perspectives and policies inside out. The director's responsibility is to moderate debate and evaluate speeches and both formal and informal debate. Now, what is both formal and informal debate? Formal debate takes the form of speeches, for example, that you give in a more formalized setting, such as the general speakers list. And we'll get to what all these words mean in just a few slides. What are equally important at a conference like HMUN Dubai are all the informal forms of debate that exist around that. Informal forms of debate include not just your moderated caucuses, but your unmoderated caucuses, include the way you interface with delegates in other times of blocking or lobbying. It involves all of the really important social elements of being a leader and being able to work with others collaboratively that we try to evaluate and bring out in all of our delegates at HMUN conferences, and that we would hope to bring out from all of you at HMUN. Crisis committees in particular may have a crisis director who manages backroom and controls the flow of crisis arc and crisis breaks. However, this is an optional role that you will not see in the committees that you're participating in, but a role you will definitely see reflected are assistant directors who help track speeches and presentations, who evaluate in-room debate and out-room collaboration, who help moderating debate alongside the director, who can help with note passing and managing some of the more logistical ends of running a committee like MUN software and roll call. With our team of both assistant directors and directors, we ensure that there are enough eyes on you that you can pursue both forms of formal and informal debate simultaneously in passing chits to others, giving strong speeches, writing clauses, and we have the ability to track all of that progress to ensure that we're helping you make the most out of this opportunity, grow, and evaluating you very holistically. Here's a rough schedule for what the flow of a resolution committee might look like. On Friday, January 10th, on the first session, we would have a long list of speakers, GSL or General Speakers List speeches. This is the opportunity for all This is the opportunity for all members of the General Assembly or of the resolution-based committee to give a generalized speech about the topic, their stance on the topic, and their broad goals for the rest of conference at the very beginning of conference. Once these speakers list, which are more general first or initial speeches, are concluded, we move into moderated caucuses. Moderated caucuses are more narrow or niche elements of the agenda, so subtopics of the topic that will be discussed. A quintessential example of a moderated caucus that may be discussed in a resolution committee, especially the resolution committees that you'll be participating in the HMUN Dubai, such as ECOFIN, the committee I'm chairing, is one of the first moderated caucuses you will have, would likely be about which topic you would like to pursue for the rest of the committee and what you would like to set the agenda officially to. Since our resolution-based committees have two topic options in some cases, that is often what this first moderated caucus slot is used for. So after some general speakers list speeches and then a more narrow moderated caucus where people bring out more pointed opinions about which topic perhaps they would like to pursue, the committee will set the agenda. And then once you set the agenda, we will typically end that first day and first session with an unmoderated caucus to give people the opportunity to find people who, from the general speakers list, they want to work with and they want to speak with through the rest of the conference. On the next day, which is Saturday, we have we have two slots, one of 3.5 hours and one of 3 hours, where we begin to take the ideas that we had on presented on Friday through the moderated caucus and through the speeches, and we begin to turn those into policy suggestions. This happens by working on writing a working paper, and that happens in both unmods, where these papers are literally written by you, typed up on shared Google documents using your computers, when the ideas for them are generated through moderated caucuses, where delegates propose elements of the topic they want to talk about. So they take the big topic and they break it down. So they would be able to take a big topic like climate change and break it down to perhaps a green energy policy, or to sustainable, or perhaps to subsidies for solar panels. Like, if you can really break it down to an element that's very niche, we'll be able to discuss it very substantively. And that's what's done on session 2. We discuss and we talk about these ideas in the form of moderated caucuses, and then in the unmods you write a policy solution with your bloc or people whose perspectives in country policy you align with. Then, by the end of the session, we hope to submit working papers, which are the first pass of some of the big policy solutions you have in mind to develop through the course of this committee. At that third session, we present all the working papers that are made, and then we end with moderated caucuses or unmoderated caucuses after asking each set of presenters for their working papers and question and answer responders. After asking them questions about their work, what their ideas are, we end with time for people who had like-minded working papers to have the opportunity to begin planning to merge them the next day to create longer, more comprehensive, and more robust draft resolutions. And Sunday is devoted to exactly that, to fleshing out these draft resolutions. We begin with draft resolution writing, which is the process of taking working papers that have overlapping characteristics. So let's say both your smaller block and another small block looked at different elements of this climate change topic. You might want to focus on first, making the parts that overlap more concise, and everything else that's involved, ensuring that you are able to have both big ideas represented, and policy elements that clash are then negotiated and siphoned out. And so that's what happens on Sunday on our first session, session 4, where these draft resolutions are written. We then proceed with moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses as we work on writing these, and then within that session we submit all draft resolutions by the very end, so that by session 5 we can present all draft resolutions. We can have moderated caucuses and unmoderated caucuses that discuss each draft resolution or them all holistically more substantively. We have the amendment process, which is when these draft resolutions can be changed, and we have final voting so that the committee can pass a draft resolution that addresses the agenda set on the first day. And then on Monday, we wrap up the amendment process, any outstanding procedural elements that we should have looked at earlier. Those are all, we have the opportunity to address them on Monday, and with our leftover time, we usually take that opportunity to do FunMon and get to know everyone a little better. And it's a great opportunity to get to know the people you've been working with for the last 3 days in a non-Model UN speech and debate context too. So I'll now walk us over the rough flow of a crisis committee. A crisis committee looks very different than a General Assembly committee or a resolution-based committee, because in a crisis committee, the flow is generated by what are called crisis breaks. So crisis break is when our crisis staff of assistant directors and perhaps a director or another member of secretariat would come in to present to committee something that has gone wrong, a crisis that has occurred within the context of the topic they're discussing. At HMUN, this would be in the context of the Indian independence movement. They would come to give some sort of historical update, which may have been how things actually went or how they are generating things to have been. And delegates are then expected to respond to this crisis break through both one, a public directive, which is what they write in the front room. It's like a working paper. It's a very short 1 to 2 page, written bullet points of how they would want to address the problem. And all the same, they are expected to address it through private crisis notes, which are 1 page letters that they write to the backroom, where they ask for their portfolio, because they represent individuals, not countries, to take on a certain action to either further their standing in committee or their private goals, or to help them make the most of the public crisis that is going on. So the rough flow of a crisis committee is cyclical. So it's a certain cycle that begins when the staff could announce a crisis break. Then committee will motion to introduce moderated caucuses, perhaps round robins, to discuss the crisis break. Directives will be written simultaneously as people give their speeches to get some of those first pass ideas for this crisis out. Then we have unmoderated caucuses where these directives get merged, and then we have a motion to introduce the directives. Often there will be 2-4, 2 against, or 3-4, 3 against speeches, either in favor of or against these directives. And then we vote on the directives. Based on the directives that pass, the next crisis will be updated accordingly, because that will change the way committee goes, on the narrative flow of committee, and then the cycle repeats. And this, we can expect anything to the tune of 8 to 10 such cycles over the course of a crisis committee over 4 days. And so it's a completely different form of experience than you would get at a general assembly or resolution-based committee, but it tests many of the same skills in a different way. For example, instead of writing draft resolutions, which are more comprehensive and robust, you do directives, which are less formal, but we try to make you do more of that over the course of the session. Next, we'll move to parliamentary procedure. Here, I'll hand the floor to Patil to discuss this section. Patil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's go over how committee is generally going to function. To start off, your director is going to conduct something called roll call. This is basically a register or an attendance, a formal attendance, to see who is present in the committee, and specifically to allow delegates to indicate whether they are present or present and voting. The distinction between the two is that if you are present and voting, you cannot abstain during voting procedures. But if you say that you are present, then you can abstain. And so, yeah, somebody will then, after conducting that, will raise a motion to open debate, and delegates will vote on that. This will typically pass, and we'll move on to the next part of committee. Well, okay, we're not going to move on to the next part of committee. We're going to move on to points, but we'll go over the general flow later. These are the key points that delegates can raise, and this differs slightly from general procedure, rules of procedure, and other local Dubai conferences. So please make a note of these. Delegates can raise a point of order. And so they cannot interrupt a speech unless the speech itself is out of order. And these are done for corrections to parliamentary procedure. So if, directors are very highly trained, but everyone is human. If they make a small mistake and a delegate, notices, then they can raise a point of order and clarify the parliamentary procedure error that was made, and so that it can be corrected. A point of parliamentary inquiry is raised to raise a specific inquiry about how parliamentary procedure is working or should work. So if you don't understand the general flow of committee, the types of motions, if you don't understand a specific point, you can raise this to gain further clarification from your director. This is very brief. So for example, point of parliamentary inquiry, how do we vote on directives? And then the director will explain that to you. You can raise these points. Don't feel as though raising these will make you look like you don't know what's happening in committee. It's better to ask questions than to be sat there confused. So we do encourage the use of these points, but obviously in moderation. Some things you can figure out on your own, but if you have pressing questions, please do raise these points. The next one is a point of personal privilege. This is for things more personal. For example, if the room is too cold, you can't hear the speaker. If you need somebody to speak slower, for example, Vade and I, you can raise a point of personal privilege. To clarify, you do not need to raise a point of personal privilege to use the bathroom, get water, or step out of committee, but obviously do not abuse the power and that you have, so don't constantly be leaving in and out of committee room and making that disruptive for the rest of the delegates. And again, the only type of point that can ever interrupt, sorry, we just go back. That is the only point that can ever interrupt a speaker. A key point that I would like to raise is that we do not accept points of information. I know that again, in a lot of international conferences and on the international circuit, points of information are raised to ask questions to delegates after their speeches and to facilitate that back and forth debate, but that is something that we do not do as part of HMUN, so no points of information are allowed. All right, so the types of motions. The dais will entertain typically 3 to 5 motions at a time, voted on in order of most to least disruptive. The dais also has a discretion to rule any motions that they deem dilatory or ask for specific motions. So to encourage the committee to perhaps discuss or debate on a specific subtopic. And all delegates must vote on motions as they are procedural matters. So you cannot abstain from voting on a motion. So the types of motions. Number one, there is the motion to open and close debate. This is needed at the very start and at the very end of the conference, just for formal procedure, for formal reasons. You can also suspend or reopen debate. This is used at the end and beginning of sessions in the middle of the conference. There is a motion to for a form of debate. So there are a lot of different types of debate that can be raised. Number one, this is the speakers list. So if you'd like to open the speakers list and add your name to that, whether that's in a moderated caucus, you can do that. You can raise a motion for a moderated caucus. So this is a type of formal debate, typically on a specific subtopic within your larger committee topic. So for example, the delegate of Brazil would like to raise a moderated caucus to discuss the issue of, I don't know, medical aid for human trafficking victims for a total time of 10 minutes and individual speakers' time of 1 minute. And then the dais or the chair will accept another motion and that procedure repeats. And then another motion that can be raised is an unmod. This is an informal type of debate where delegates can talk to each other informally. It's basically typically about like anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes, can be shorter, for delegates to come together to start forming blocks, to start discussing the contents of potential draft resolutions or working papers. So it's very informal, informal discussion between delegates. And then there is the motion for a round robin. And yeah, and so that process repeats. And delegates will be voting on this from most to least disruptive. So keep that in mind. The next one that we have is a motion to introduce working papers, draft resolutions, and directives. And so for working papers and draft resolutions, delegates will specify the presentation and the Q&A time. Again, your chair has the discretion to allocate a specific, number of minutes to presentation and Q&A time, but delegates can still raise potential options. For directives, delegates will specify for and against speeches, so 2 for 2 against is typically common. And finally, a motion to go directly into voting procedure on working papers, draft resolutions, and directives. This is a repetition. Sorry, not to introduce, but to go directly into them. Can be combined with a motion to introduce directives. Thank you. Next slide. All right, so some of you might be a little perplexed as to what I meant from most to least disruptive. So this is the order in which we vote on the motions that are raised. So for example, if a delegate raises a motion to extend the previous caucus, the delegates will vote for that first. And so this is from most to least disruptive. We then have move into voting procedures, introduce working papers and draft resolutions or directives, then unmoderated caucuses. So they have higher priority than the moderated caucuses that you see is situated slightly below. Round robins, moderated caucuses. And yeah, so longer moderated caucuses will always be more disruptive. So for example, if a delegate raises a moderated caucus for 10 minutes total time, individual speakers time 1 minute, but another delegate raises a moderated caucus for, again, total time of 10 minutes, but individual speakers time of 30 seconds, the delegates will be voting on that second moderated caucus first because it's more disruptive, because there are a higher number of speakers compared to the first moderated caucus, if that makes sense. If moderated caucus motions have the same length, the one with the greater number of speeches is more disruptive, as I just mentioned. So keep that in mind. You can be strategic. So if you want to have your moderated caucus be voted on first, you can amend your speaker's time. But just a note on that also, your chair might rule a specific time frame that you provide dilatory. So that's another factor to think about. Next, we have the types of debate that we touched on previously. So we have the speakers lists. They are not used in crisis. It's to set the speaking time and create an exhaustive list from the get-go. Then we have round robins. These aren't typically used in the larger General Assembly committees, but they are, again, used to set speaking time. And the delegate that raises a round robin can go first or last. And this is essentially where the room goes around in order everyone provides a speech. Next, we have moderated caucuses. As mentioned, you set the total time, the individual speaking time, and the topic that you'd like to raise. This is more a specific topic within the broader theme of the committee. And the delegate that raises the moderated caucus that passes can either speak first or last in that list. So they have the discretion to decide if they want to go first or last. And the chair will typically pick on 4 to 5 speakers, and then we'll reopen the list if more space is permitted. And then we have unmoderated caucuses, as mentioned again. You set a total time, and just another note on this is that you can only extend an unmoderated caucus by up to half the amount, duration that you raised it for. So for example, if I raise an unmod for 20 minutes, the next motion to extend can only be for 10 minutes. Keep that in mind. So don't be asking for 60-minute extensions because your chair will not be allowing them. And finally, for double delegation general assemblies, you will typically have what is an in-room and an out-room. The in-room is where formal debate is conducted. So one of the pair of your delegation will be in the room conducting moderated caucuses and providing formal speeches. And then the second person in that pair will be in the out room, and so conducting the informal debate and forming blocks and discussing the contents of resolutions or working papers. So you have the combination of in-room and out-room, so unmods typically in moderated caucuses happening concurrently and simultaneously. These are for double delegation committees. Next, we have the authors panel. These are for resolution-based committees. These consist of 5-minute reading periods, presentation, and Q&A. Again, sometimes your chair might amend this timing under their discretion if they see that less or more time is needed on the basis of the committee size or just timing in general. So keep that in mind. Unmoderated caucuses are typically done to decide the authors panel representative. So you should be having these discussions prior to the authors panel. And so the members within your block, you guys have to come to a consensus to decide who will be on the authors panel. And that's a part of the debate and the negotiation that we want to see. So the delegates motion will specify a total time for each portion. And for the Q&A part, H1 Dubai only times the answering of the questions. So we won't be having our stopwatch or our time just go off completely. We'll only be hitting pause when for the answering of the questions. All right, voting procedures. Again, these are for resolution-based committees. They require a motion. Voting procedure occurs in the order of introduction. So if one block decides to introduce their resolution paper, that one will be voted on first. Delegates can vote in favor, against, or abstain only if the delegate was present and not present in voting, as we specified during roll call. Passing requires simple majority with amendments being excluded. So that is the formula that you see there. And if there's any repetition or contradiction, the most recently passed resolution will define the ultimate terms of the committee. Finally, there's no restriction on the number of draft resolutions that may pass. I know sometimes delegates go to a lot of different conferences where one draft resolution will be accepted, but there technically is no restriction on the number of DRs. Again, sometimes in committees, or at least a committee that I've previously directed, based on the nature of the topic, only one draft resolution could be passed because more than one draft resolution would be contradictory. But that was a very unique case. So just keep this general rule in mind. All right, Vade, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce directives.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Patia. I think if I just go over what we have left, we have quite a bit of ground left to cover. So we'll try to move a little quick and get through as many of these big ideas as we can ahead of conference. So introducing directives. So directives are a crisis form, like we discussed, the crisis equivalent of a working paper, and it has no presentation or Q&A, but rather the motions are to introduce directives, to go to 2 for 2 against, to argue for or against these directives, and then move into voting procedure on these directives. The dais will read the directive, which is a written sheet or a few sheets, usually merged of paper together, and then the committee will have the opportunity to debate those ideas and those directives closely. This process may include amendments or division of the question, which means if the directive has 6 clauses, of which 2 committees having a hard time coming to agree on, you can divide the question to vote on the other 4 first, pass those, and then perhaps look at the 2 remaining more closely. Amendments are sometimes friendly if if accepted by sponsors, but are unfriendly if not accepted by sponsors, and then have to be voted on if accepted. Then the directive will be voted on finally in its amended format. Voting procedure on directives requires a motion, just like voting procedure for working papers or draft resolutions. Voting will occur in order of submission unless the motion explicitly states otherwise. Delegates can vote in favor, against, or abstain, just as long as they did not, in roll call, mark themselves as present in voting, but rather present. And passing one just requires simple majority, which is the total number of people voting for must simply be greater than the total number of people voting against. And any amendments will require 2/3 of committee to pass. And here we will not be accepting abstentions in this specific procedure. Now, let's look at some of the big changes, or the big differences rather, between resolution and crisis committees. So resolutions include general assemblies and ECOSOCs. In the double del GAs, for example, which is just one of the types of committees that is simulated here, we have in-room and out-room representation. So in-room and out-room is something that someone can motion for, and once that has been, if that motion has been entertained and then passed by the committee, there is one delegate with the use of laptop prohibited who will stay inside the committee room to engage in substantive debate. So these are giving speeches, traditionally like proposing motions for moderated caucuses, etc. And there'll be an outroom delegate who is allowed to use their laptop, who will go outside the room to work on the working paper or draft resolution. Again, this is for double del committee, so when you're working in a pair, this is how you will be cooperating as a pair. And then in on-mod sessions, both go, so even the in-room delegate goes out-room to join their out-room delegate, so that they can work on their papers together and they can share with one another their missing links. So the in-room delegate can share with the out-room delegate what the speeches in committee have been about, what direction they've taken, what are the good ideas to really implement into the working paper or draft resolution, and the out-room delegate can share how the blocking elements or the policy, the writing elements are going, and then those come together very, very neatly in the doubled out GA. Resolutions, so there are two types of resolutions: working papers, which are less formal, they're just kind of first pass, what are your big ideas? And we have many working papers because we get those in small groups. And then draft resolutions, which are mergers of either 2 or 3 working papers that take some of these ideas and refine them and make them more, and make the policies proposed more robust and just overall more substantive. So this has a heading, it has preambulatory clauses, which just describe the purpose, what is the motivation behind this paper, and the different things it addresses. Operative clauses, which are actions taken by that body of the UN, and it is typed, so all resolution delegates must ensure that they bring laptop or any technology that could help them do this, such as an iPad, to conference, all excuse me, all 4 days of committee. Here on this page, we have an example of preambulatory, which are the clauses that go at the beginning of the paper that motivate the intention behind the paper, and operative clauses, which are more the specific actions that the UN body is going to take to respond to this issue. Here's a sample draft resolution. I won't read out everything going on here because we will share this presentation with you, but some of the big ideas going on you should look at the way they formatted the heading. It's very neat. They have 2 preambulatory clauses that kind of explain the motivation for us to be here, and then the operative clause opens with the action verb of recommending. So this body is making a formal recommendation. So that tends to be what the nature of these bodies' proposals are. They tend to be recommendations or suggestions for certain actions to be taken by either this body or by related bodies or by perhaps new bodies that should be proposing from scratch altogether at conference. Now let's do the same sort of big picture broad overview for a crisis committee. Directives have a similar structure as a resolution, that's just much less formal. It's just a title, a sponsor list, and a signatory list, no preambulatory clauses, and we have operative clauses. And since directives are handwritten, they will be merged with other directives of about a page in length during the unmoderated caucuses, as we've discussed in crisis procedure. This is an example of what this is one example of what a directive can look like. Again, I'm not going to read it, but you can see that it's a lot less formal. Then this also is always written and not typed, so it'll be a little less neat, but it has some of those important ideas that basically come to fray. We don't use operative clauses or preambulatory clauses quite the same way. We just have action items that we as a committee would want to take. There are crisis arcs, which are a delegate's personal arc or narrative of their behavior and motivation in committee to reach their personal goals. And these arcs are developed through crisis notes that are submitted to the crisis director or assistant directors at regular intervals. Each delegate has a 2-notepad system, which I'm not going to discuss further in this webinar as we will in our crisis specific one, but it gives delegates the opportunity to develop this narrative behind their individual portfolio character in a really meaningful way. And here are some examples of the kinds of ideas that you get to develop in a crisis arc, such as researching a new addictive penguin food, or perhaps inviting ski resorts to open branches in Antarctica if you have, like, say, a committee that is based in that region of the world. Crisis notes are creative, they're 1 page, they only ask for 2 or 3 things, and they're written to any other member, like a family, a friend, a member of government, a general, and they lay out the steps for what you want to accomplish, why you want to accomplish that, and then they summarize them in a way that makes it easy for our assistant directors and director to interpret and then to give to you to make your goals, to help you realize your goals in the crisis committee. Here's an example. Crisis note, I won't dwell on this again because we'll discuss this more at further length in the crisis specific webinar. And now we look at notable differences from things you may have already seen in the Dubai Model UN circuit. So HMUN procedure, for example, does not use any personal pronouns in crisis committees when you're not representing a character. Sorry about that. So at HMUN, we don't allow personal pronouns when you're representing a country. So when you, let's say, are the delegate of China or the delegate of Afghanistan, you would not have the opportunity to refer to one another as I, you, he, she, they, them. However, when you are representing a character, say in the Indian Independence Movement Committee, you are Jawaharlal Nehru, you can then refer to that character using personal pronouns to just create that more textured feel to committee. And so that's one of the differences, but that's only permissible in the crisis committee. Not all the committees standard model UN rules, which are no personal pronouns apply. Second, the big difference that you will feel at conference is that points of information are not permitted at HMUN. That's because of the size of the conference. So to continue moving efficiently, we have to ensure that we don't stop for points of information, but continue to give people the opportunity to speak, to promote more speeches, as we find that that's a richer format of debate. And so really, as I've been mentioning in the Q&A responses, you want to ensure that the kinds of things you would bring out for POIs, you accentuate through other elements of speech and debate, such as the speeches you give, the lobbying you do, etc. And in the Dubai circuit, in many conferences, points of information are utilized, and so that is going to be a difference that you have to keep in mind coming into the conference. Next, the following motions are not permitted. So at HMUN, we have no motions to lay on, take from the table, motion to postpone indefinitely, motion to reconsider after something has failed, a motion for censure, or an objection to consideration, whereas some of these motions may be permitted in the Dubai circuit. Next, a note on sensitivity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So HMUN Dubai conference policies, big ideas are that English is the language of the conference. All delegations must earn a position paper to be eligible for awards in the GA and ECOSOC committees. There'll be WBA on national dress of the delegate, so not the assigned country, but rather the country that you are truly from. So, say I was a delegate participating from India, but I was the delegate of, let's say I was the delegate of France. I would not wear national dress of France, but rather of the country I, as an individual, am actually from, or Western business from. And then we have no pre-writing or work outside of committee time, no plagiarism, and we have very extended policies that outline how we define these terms, for example, on our website. We do not allow the use of technology during formal debate. So you can, while we do we do ensure you have computers or iPads, some form of technology available with you to write resolutions. When we are in formal debate and in committee, you will not be allowed to use them in any capacity. They will only be in controlled instances for certain tasks during these resolution committees, i.e. like writing the resolutions or writing the working papers or draft resolutions, that this will be allowed. Otherwise, we do not permit their use in any other form, and crisis committees do not require laptops. HMUN Dubai's policies are written in consultation with Harvard's Title IX and Office of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response, are found on the HMUN Dubai website, as well as on the waiver that all delegates have signed before attending conference. And two key policies on that document I would like to highlight are our sexual and gender health harassment policies and policies regarding harassment, violence, and discrimination. And HMUN has a no tolerance policy for any violation, a zero tolerance policy for any violation of any of these expectations. And so please go through these carefully to understand the norms of respect that we hope to uphold at HMUN. Continuing on some of our important policies, these are implemented so that we can create a safe space for every delegate and a safe environment for this conference to ensure that debate is fair and equitable, and it gives delegates the opportunity to preserve the integrity of the activity. We have a zero tolerance stance against any form, additionally, of discrimination, harassment, or assault, and it puts these procedures in place quickly and effectively so that we are equipped to respond to any incidents that may be anywhere in the neighborhood of one of these egregious violations of people's respect. Pre-writing is another big element of our policy because it's strictly prohibited, and it will result in disqualification from awards consideration. We want all of your Model UN experience to be packed into the 4 days that you are there in committee to maximize the value you get out of conference, and to ensure that there's no unfair advantage given to you if you had more time before the conference began to work on some of the different elements of committee. So the act of bringing any pre-written / almost fully written clauses, crisis notes, directives or anything like that and working them into committee documents is not allowed at committee. We track editing history via committee folders because everything is done using G Suite on Google Docs, and cases of pre-writing will be thoroughly investigated because it gives you an unfair advantage against your peers. And one of the easiest ways that we can tell that you have been engaged in pre-writing is when the ideas you have brought, because they were pre-written before conference happened, do not tend to align perfectly with what we are hearing discussed in committee. And so the easiest way to avoid that is do not work on these things before. Rather use that time to read about the agenda, read about different things you might want to discuss in your topics, take notes on different articles you read, the background guide, but ensure that you're not turning anything into clauses or anything that would be worked into committee paperwork, because that is strictly prohibited. Things to flag in committee are exclusions, any form of exclusion based on identity, harassment and discrimination, as if it ever creates a barrier for delegates to participate, delegate diversity and the inclusion of all delegates at conference, and any tactics that violate the rules of procedure like pre-writing, deleting other delegates' clauses, or just flat out plagiarism. And so we will ensure that we work as staffers to create this optimal environment in which you can thrive. So this further goes to include any inappropriate messaging, misrepresentation of stereotypes of nations, ethnicities, cultures, use of outdated or derogatory terminology, focusing on winning an award or succeeding in debate over creating a collaborative environment and being respectful to the intricacies of a topic or your peers, and unwelcome attention from one delegate that may create an unsafe environment for one or multiple other delegates. Then in ensuring a safe MUN environment, we just try to assume best intentions. We are an active bystander in committee, and when in doubt if a topic is appropriate or not, we always err on the side of caution. You're always free to have questions of correct terminology, or is this the correctly sensitive, is this the sensitive terminology I should be using? It can always be addressed privately to your staffer, so a director, an assistant director, and they're always free to help you along with secretariat to discuss concerns or issues of sensitivity. Here's our official statement and a hotline number in case any of these problems come up during committee. And this just completes our commitment to ensuring a safe model UN environment. Our key takeaways: we have a HMUN Dubai diversity, equity, and inclusion form to report any issues that you may face or any concerns you may have in this regard. Diversity and inclusion can be difficult to talk about and address, but it's very crucial that we do. We have zero tolerance for harassment, assault, or any form of real disrespect that impacts another delegate's experience at conference. And positive changes can and have been achieved at Model UN conferences at the high school level, and so communication about these issues is important, and all of us on the HMUN Dubai Secretariat are always available to discuss these topics sensitively and discreetly. If you have questions or concerns, you can check out the HMUN Dubai website. And with that, this presentation comes to an end. I will use the remaining few minutes we have, perhaps the remaining few minutes before my computer dies, to try to respond to as many of the questions in the Q&A section as possible. Mustafa, can you hear me?
Yes, Ved.
Okay. How long can we keep this session running?
I think you have another answer for questions if you would like.
Sorry, what did you say?
10 minutes, another 10 minutes for the questions.
Excellent. So I'll be back in a minute with my computer charger, and then in that meantime, why don't you all put your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box, and I'll begin to address as many of them as I can in those 10 minutes. Thanks, Mustafa. Awesome. Thank you for using this opportunity to put some of your questions in the chat. I'll just begin to tackle as many of them as I can in the next 10 minutes. So let's get started. How many members does a block need to have to present a DR or any presentations? That's an excellent question. Each committee has its unique size, and so because it has its unique size, because it has a unique size, the director will outline before you move into the working paper procedure or before you move into the draft resolution procedure, how many sponsors, how many members you need for that to come through and how many signatories you must have. And so those limits will be defined to you very clearly by your director based on the size of your committee when you're actually there at conference. It differs from committee to committee. Next, is the usage of AI in a resolution committee allowed? That's a very good question. As part of our plagiarism policy, AI, so any form of generated AI, is not acceptable, and because we fear that it takes away from your originality and expression in the policy, recommendation, and proposal aspects or elements of conference. So we do not allow for the use of AI in resolution committees. Next, when will committee groups be made and when will lobbying be allowed? It's a good question. So committee groups can be made by delegates as soon as the first, this may depend from director to director because they exercise discretion here, but often in a resolution-based committee, which tend to be larger, from the first session onwards, committee groups can be made. General procedure is that if you do make a formal committee group, so for a group for your entire committee or a group for a certain block and committee, that at least one assistant director must be added to the group chat from the very beginning. So as a dais, we can still track all the messages and ensure that safety, all the elements we just of respect and creating a safe environment that we just discussed are all included. And we can also track what as a block what the ideas different people were proposing were and help see how those develop on into your working papers and draft resolution. And when will lobbying be allowed? That's another good question. Lobbying is always allowed during the committee sessions, but we create formal time for that using the unmoderated caucuses. And if you go through this presentation, when we send it to you, you'll see the different blocks of time, the different sessions where we're dominated by unmoderated caucuses. I see my next question is, who do we ask the point of parliament inquiry from? Yes, that's a great question. So all points should be directed to the dais. So if I were a delegate, I might say raise my placard and be recognized by the director or the assistant director, and then I would say so they'd ask me, delegate of Bulgaria, to what point do you rise? To which I would say, delegate of Bulgaria has a point of parliamentary inquiry. How does the resolution voting process work? And then they'd help me understand that. And because the hope is that in my asking that, there were also other members or other delegates in committee who have probably gained from understanding that procedure more thoroughly, and it'll allow them to make more of the element of committee that is just upcoming. Next, are in and outroom spots for double delegations permitted to switch spots? Okay, sorry, I couldn't read that too well. Yes, so in-room and out-room delegates are not hard fixes, and over the course of a double delegation committee, it's a good idea sometimes to swap out so both delegates get to experience both roles or responsibilities, the in-room and the out-room delegate. However, what we do mandate as a policy for this swapping is that it happens at an organized interval. And so what that means is that if you're going to swap the person who's in the in-room and at the out-room, it can't just happen in the middle of committee. It would be very disrespectful for a delegate member to just get up and leave while, let's say, another delegate is giving a speech or the director is addressing committee. So rather, at the next unmoderated caucus or the next time when both the in-room and out-room delegate are together, that's when you can decide to switch positions. And then the next time we motion for in-room, out-room, and we split up in committee, you can just send the other delegate to the outroom instead. We had another question. I had two students with the same committee and country. Will they be together? Yes. So that could be one of two different things. On the one hand, that could be if they have the same committee. That could mean that they're in the double delegation committee, or perhaps in a committee that has two simulations, so two rooms. So to try to ensure that we can accommodate as many of you as possible, a committee might be split into, say, Spec Ball 1 or Spec Ball 2, and so that's the spot of clarification there. They may either be in a double delegation committee, and you can find the double delegation committee names on our website, or they might be in a committee that has two simulations, and that would be indicated by like a 1, like an I, or a 2 right next to the right next to the committee name during the allocation. Next, I would like to have a clarification between directive and a director. That's a good question. Yes. So a directive is a piece of paper, and a director is is a staffer. And now what that looks like is the directive is a piece of paper on which different solutions are written, and these solutions are like to the point. In a crisis committee, they hope to address the different crisis elements that have been proposed, whereas the director is the member of staff who has written the background guide, who is a Harvard University student, who is an expert on the specific topic you're discussing, and they're the people who will help walk you through and guide you through all of committee, and are your guide through committee, and are the end source that evaluates your performance in committee. Next question. For the double delegation, are we supposed to submit one position paper or two separate position papers? It's a very good question. I think that I reckon it will be one joint position paper, but I think specifics will follow for this. It is for this specific committee for the double delegation committees will follow from the USG committees, which is my three, and she will keep you posted on that. Will there be a motion to set agenda? Again, excellent question. As I mentioned at the start of the first session, right after the general speakers list speeches, yes, there will be a motion to set the agenda. And this may follow another motion, which is a moderated caucus, to discuss which topic delegates would prefer. And then we raise a motion to set the agenda. And then the topic that passes that is the one we discuss for the rest of conference. Next question is, can I make my speeches previously and deliver those during the session? So unfortunately, that is still considered by our policy a form of pre-writing, so that's not allowed. We would hate for you to be spending too much time working on writing speeches before you get to conference, and we would much rather you engage with the material more holistically, because when you get to conference, you might not know what the specific elements we're going to be looking at would be, and so it would be perhaps more productive to go through the background guide to absorb as much of that as possible, and then really write, instead of writing speeches, write a few bullet points on, say, a sticky note or a small piece of paper to guide you through your speeches when you're at conference. How will note passing work? Can we pass a note to another delegate at any time? Yes, so for note passing, we will have assistant directors help pass notes. So, especially in the larger resolution-based committees, there should always be one assigned assistant director for a session who will be, if you raise your hand with a note, it won't disturb the flow of committee. They'll just walk over to you, pick it up, see the country you've written to, walk over to that country and pass the note. And a little pointer I'll make about notes, actually 2 pointers. First, notes are not substantive, so they aren't evaluated. We don't evaluate the notes to say, oh, this delegate asked this delegate this type of question, because we, again, don't allow for questions or points of information. So this should not be a workaround for that, to be discussing like substantively, or to substantively, using that as an opportunity to reflect your understanding of the agenda. However, what we do with notes is that any note that you've written is in the public domain of committee and is at any moment eligible to be inspected by an assistant director or a director, and that's to uphold the policies I was just discussing about creating a safe environment for everyone at conference. Okay, I'm going to look for my next question. I'm a bit confused on the idea of debate given the lack of points of information. Can you please clarify? Yes, of course. So the idea of debate given the lack of points of information is really as follows. When we think about debate, we don't think about it as necessarily always just this back and forth of a repertoire of question asked and then answered, trying to trick someone with a trick question and then see how they respond to that, or hit them with a certain fact that might, perhaps change the way that we would think about their argument or their speech. We here think about debate as a much more holistic and really a much bigger idea, where debate is the speeches given and how they fall relationally to one another. And so while there aren't these points of information that are opportunities to isolate yourself with another delegate, you can always address the rhetoric of committee more broadly and address the debates, which are the big ideas that are at the heart of committee through the opportunities you have to give your speeches. And we really think that this model simulates more closely what real debate in the political sphere looks like, because it's far less often that you have the opportunity to put two politicians or two policymakers in a room to debate one another up front, just one in front of the other, ask one another questions and have that back and forth. But much rather, it's people giving their own speeches like you see on the media, and then it's about how those fall in relation to one another that creates the broad idea of debate, that creates the broad idea of rhetoric, and is really a lot more applicable to the modern world. We're not trying to just make you guys, debate experts, but rather to help you understand what this more abstract form of debate can even look like. How many authors, co-authors are there for resolutions and working papers, and also can laptops be used offline during formal committee? So no, laptops cannot be used offline during formal committee. And how many authors, co-authors might there be? This will be specified from a committee to committee basis, again, based on the size of each committee. So what would be fair to, based on how many working papers and draft resolutions are allowed. So your director will definitely clarify these for you at committee. Will you send us the presented PowerPoint? Yes, that will be sent over to you by Worldview. How will chairs decide the people that will be chosen? By what view will they decide? So this question could be referring to two things. The first it could be referring to is speakers, is the authors panel, which is when the people behind a working paper or draft resolution present it or answer questions about it. And in this case, it's chosen by the members of that block. And then the second thing could be referring to is awards. And then we have a more comprehensive awards criteria that's available on our website and will be discussed in the future on the future webinars in our series that go over how chairs make decisions between other delegates based on their behavior and based on their conduct in committee. It's been 10 minutes, so I'll look for one final question I can address. So let's see. And the last question I'll address is, how will a single delegate committee participate in outroom unmoderated caucuses? And so when you're in a single delegate committee, rather than having a designated in-room or out-room, you will be developing your working paper and draft resolutions in unmoderated caucuses and using moderated caucuses to give speeches. So everything out-room becomes unmoderated and like unmoderated caucus, and everything in-room becomes a moderated caucus. And that's the distinction we use. So when you're in an unmoderated caucus, that's when your laptop's open and you're working with your teammates in your block to put together those ideas and those policy proposals. All right. I think we have to end our webinar there. Thank you all so much for attending the first in the series of webinars on HMUN Dubai, on the road to HMUN Dubai, to preparing for the conference and ensuring that you're equipped with all of the things you need to have a successful time at the conference and to really grow and make the most of this opportunity and experience. Mustafa, do we know when the next is scheduled, or will they be receiving that soon via email?
I think the next one is on the 10th.
Okay, excellent. And so the next of these webinars will be on the 10th, but you'll be contacted by Worldview and Maitri regarding those upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time today. I hope that this was a productive opportunity to begin understanding what's going on in this world of Model UN and specifically HMUN Dubai. And through these webinars, you feel completely equipped to make the most of HMUN Dubai. We're very excited to be hosting you at Dubai in January. So see you all very, very soon. If you're in the ECOFIN committee, I'll be seeing you then. Keep your eyes out for some ECOFIN specific updates from me. But yes, on that note, we can end the webinar. Thank you all so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll see you in a few days very soon for the next in this speaker series.